The Orthan race of the planet Orth had prepared for the comet's impact as much as they could in the weeks prior. The damage was expected to be minimal, but when Zero Day arrived, the impact brought a terror, something no Orthan could have imagined. One Orthan, a scientist, was saved from the chaos because at the time he was on a mission to fix a small satellite orbiting his home world. As he looked out onto his planet, he saw the comet's small impact in the distance. The initial impact of the comet seemed minimal, but the following days made him question everything. He saw a distorted and unnatural darkness, a corruption that seemed to be spreading across his planet. All communications from Orth had ceased. The Orthan scientist had to watch on helplessly as it consumed everything on his home world, including his people. For the next several weeks, the scientist watched the planet, endlessly staring for any signs of life. One day he spotted a small area that seemed to be clear of the corruption. It was so small at first, he believed it to simply be a figment of his imagination, a delusion brought on by his grief. However, over the next several days he watched as this spot grew larger and larger, and with it, his hope, until he could make it out to be an area that had been cleansed of the dark corruption. At this, he decides to return to the planet in an attempt to discover what has cleansed this small area.
Hello and welcome to the Secret of Turridohrnii. In this game, players will play a lone Orthan scientist who must find answers to the event that has just wiped out their home world. Aimed for PC audiences, this third-person experience will take players on a story-driven adventure with elements of puzzle solving, combat, and exploration. Their mission will be to purge the corruption that has just enveloped their planet and to save what's left of their race. When players initially set out to explore this new landscape, they will find that the world is covered in new life forms. They will find creatures of all sizes and degree of danger. Additionally, they will find a large quantity of small jellyfish-looking creatures throughout the world that aimlessly float around and seemingly serve no purpose or threat. That is, until the player has a run-in with what looks like a spirit form of another Orthan. During the encounter, the spirit touches the scientist on his face and triggers a flood of visions and memories of the terror that the Orthans experienced in the last moments after the impact. He also learns that the corruption is known as Turri, and the jellyfish creatures are known as Dorni. Out of the extreme pain and confusion, the lone scientist shoots the spirit and then runs in fear. Not knowing what happened in the encounter, the player later realizes from the visions that the spirit creature and the Dorni are somehow connected to his missing people. He felt a sense of struggle and torment within them. He also realizes that he's been changed by the encounter. He now has the ability to absorb some of the strange energies that the Dorni give off and use them to fight back against the Turri. This is where the player's adventures begin.
Players proceed into the Turri areas with the aim of cleansing them. In this post-impact world, the environment will exist in two forms: the Turri, or corrupted areas, and the cleansed. Once the player overcomes an area's local challenge, puzzle, monster, or boss, the area becomes cleansed and will transform from one state to the other. The art style for the Turri state has a similar look and feel to the game Limbo. These areas are dark, colorless, and hazy. This would give the 3D environment a slight blurry, dingy, and unwelcoming feel and aesthetic. The cleansed state will show the area is clear and colorful. The blur will go away, and the scene will feel pure and refreshed. Art cues for this state will be similar to those of Ori and the Blind Forest. The transition effect between the two styles will animate similarly to the transition found in the game Flower. This animation will give the player a visual reward and a feeling of accomplishment. The art style helps immerse the player in the feelings of the character and further draws them into having a connection with the story and gameplay. The user interface further builds upon this by being diegetic. The character itself will be the information medium to display health and energy types and levels. The character's appearance, motion, breathing, and heartbeat will be indicators of his health, while energy will be displayed in glowing colored scars left over from his first encounter with the Spirit Keeper. The type of energy being used will be represented as that energy's color, and the amount will be demonstrated by how brightly the scar is glowing. Along with the art style and user interface, the audio will help further contrast the two areas. cleansed areas will have a light-hearted and soothing orchestral soundtrack, while the Turri areas have a more menacing and tension-inducing theme. The soundtrack and music will also be closely linked with the gameplay. The music that the player hears while completing puzzles and platforming will be more whimsical and curious, while during boss fights and more intense gameplay mechanics, the music will be more intense and imposing. The contrast in music will further immerse the player and create the individual feel of each aspect of the gameplay mechanics.
The gameplay revolves around 3 elements: cleansing the Turri by overcoming challenges, finding and communicating with the spirit creatures, and boss battles. The Turri in each area will have a source. In order to cleanse said area, the player will have to overcome the specific challenge. Once they do that, and reach the source of the Turri and destroy it, the cleansing transition will take place. As the player clears Turri, they will be able to utilize gained energy to communicate with some of the Dornii creatures along the way. These interactions will be an important part of the gameplay, as they are what tell the story and direct the player forward. These communications will also occasionally present the player with the choice to accomplish side challenges that will reward stat boosts and perk gains. These story drivers will direct the player throughout the entire game, and ultimately to the source of the Turri. There will be milestones in the player's progression. Each one will require a confrontation with one of the Turri overlords, a boss battle. After each milestone challenge is overcome, a new ability group and energy type will be introduced to the player. These new abilities will need to be utilized and mastered as the player progresses toward the next milestone.
Throughout the game, players will utilize 3 different energies that are absorbed from the Dornii. Red energy is for combat and other physical abilities used in traversing the world. Green energy is for supportive abilities such as saving, restoring health, and communicating with Dornii spirit keepers. Blue energy is for stealth and helps the player avoid enemies and bypass hostile areas. Energy from Dornii and weapon ammunition can be replenished throughout the levels, but will be very limited and must be used sparingly. This forces players to conserve their resources or find different and varying ways to complete tasks. The solution to area challenges will not always be obvious, and there will often be more than one approach. The player may prefer to complete puzzles and platform, but lack the energy resources to do so, and therefore be forced to confront the hostile creatures through stealth or combat instead.
Puzzles and platforming will be present throughout most of the gameplay. Players will be required to utilize their various energies in different combinations to solve the puzzles and make their way around the levels. While combat is minimal, the player will encounter hostile creatures from time to time in the Turri areas that can be fought using their firearm or appropriate energy. Stealth is a pivotal skill to the player and is necessary because there are some enemies that are too strong to be overcome by a direct approach. Stealth can be used to bypass these creatures, and it can also be utilized to get advantages on bosses that the player will encounter. Boss fights will be resource exhausting and will require combinations of all the energies and gameplay mechanics to defeat. Platforming and puzzles during the boss fights will be similar to the game Shadow of the Colossus, where the player must climb, jump, and position to defeat the boss. Shooting and combat will be essential in delivering damage to the bosses, and ultimately defeating them. Stealth will be key to getting into more advantageous positions and bypassing dangerous obstacles during the fights.
Throughout the game, the player will learn more and more about the forces behind the Turri, what the Dornii are, and how they are connected to his race in the story. As the story is revealed throughout the game, the player will be engaged and driven to seek a conclusion, and ultimately discover the secret of Turridohrnii.